One. Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemen. And joining me are my good friends, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, top shelf this afternoon, this evening, of Anshe Chesed in New York City, and Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island. Great to see you guys. We are recording this on Wednesday during a very, very heated week in Israel. As of this moment, over 400, close to 500 rockets have been shot at Israel from the Gaza Strip, reaching all the way to Tel Aviv. And of course, we are all deeply, deeply connected personally and with family and with very good friends. And just Klal Yisrael, we are connected to Israel in this irrevocable connection. And we are thinking about them, praying for strength, and praying that these rockets cease soon. So we are also thinking about Parshiot Behar Behukotai. We're ending the book of Bamidbar this Shabbat.
Yeah.
Book of Vayikra. There you go. That's where my head is, in Bamidbar. We're ending the book of Vayikra, which is located in a desert, at a mountain in a desert, which is how this parsha begins. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe Behar Sinai. Behar Sinai. It's at the mountain of Mount Sinai. In fact, the whole book takes place at Mount Sinai. There's no movement in this book, and the last two parshiot function as a kind of coda to the whole book, reminding us that we've been located at Mount Sinai, we haven't moved, and we've gotten all of these laws, ranging from the laws pertaining to sacrificial worship earlier on, the different menu of types of sacrifices, and all the way to laws pertaining to diseases and the family and ethical conduct and how one constitutes the society. If you could just talk for a minute about Behar and about this place, and perhaps if you want to just remind or refresh our viewers and listeners, who we thank for watching and listening, that Rashi, that beautiful Rashi at the beginning. Barry, you want to just take it away there?
So Behar is, as you mentioned, is at the mountain, and the laws that come up first in the Parsha have to do with the sabbatical year and the Jubilee year. Every 7 years, the land had to rest, and the crops that came up were left for animals and people that needed to eat, but nothing could actually be farmed. And in addition to that, there was a 7-year cycle. The 7-year cycle, there are 7 such cycles comprising 49 years, which culminated in the Jubilee year, at which point the ram's horn, the shofar the yovel would be blown on Yom Kippur. And it gave us the inscription that made its way onto the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. You shall proclaim liberty to all the inhabitants of the land. I've never been good at remembering quotations, so if you need the actual quote, you could read the bell. So the beginning of the Parsha, though, is this great comment by Rashi, which is Ma'anyan Shmita Etzel Har Sinai, which in colloquial English, I could tell a nice story, but for another time, means what does this have to do with the price of tea in China? Rashi is puzzled that all of a sudden we have a description of the sabbatical and Jubilee years linked to Mount Sinai. And the question, of course, is, weren't all the laws given at Mount Sinai? Why did this have to be spelled out? And the answer is that just as all the details here are spelled out, so all the details for all the laws were given at Mount Sinai, which is one of the ways in which the rabbis read the oral law into the written law given at Mount Sinai. And what we're left with here is this image of Bnei Yisrael at this mountain, receiving law about land tenure, which is how it's described in the modern commentary, about what has to happen for the Israelites to be able to keep the land. And it's quite striking that we have this image of Mount Sinai in the backdrop, as it were, when really the focus of the Parsha is on the future in the land. And there's a claim that the land can only be kept if the people follow God's law rather than do what their heart might impel them to do.
Okay, so if I may just if I can build the idea of the 7 years back to what we had last week. Last week were the holiday cycles. At the end of Emor, we have Moadei Adonai, the holidays of the Lord, the festivals of the Lord, which are in the Bible. There are 7 of them. There are 7 holidays that take place in the first 7 months, and then we have this kind of punctuation with the Israelite man who curses, and Ben Isha Yisraelit and Ben Ish Mitzri, the cursing and the stoning of the cursor, and then the some rules relating to eye for eye, etc. We talked about the death penalty, and that. Now we have this. We're back on time. We're back on units of time. So if Emor presents us with the units of time that are based on 7, that is 7 days, 7-day units, which is Shabbat, and then the 7-month unit, including 7 holidays. Now we have moved into the 7-year cycle. And if the 7-day cycle is about reminding ourselves that God has given us the gift of freedom, it's simply to punctuate the idea that we are free. There is the idea that these 7-year cycles also punctuate life on a grand scale with freedom. So I guess I want to ask a couple of questions, which is, in what way is the Bible's framing of yearly time different from our framing of time? Do we think in units of 7? And should we think in units of 7? And if we did think of units in 7, what would we be thinking of? What, like, where does the unit of 7 begin for us? That's a really quick question. Perhaps people tell their you have your relationships in units of 7, right? So you have your professional relationship in units of 7. You have your personal relationships. Maybe there's a rhythm, a cycle of all of these things. And I want you to think about that and compare it to our own present cultural predilection for the decade. So what do you make of telling time by 7s or telling time by decades, Jeremy?
But even the Bible and just Hebrew knows a base 10 system as well. Like when it just counts things up, it counts things like there's 11 things, and there's 11 and 21 when it counts, things up. It's not really like a base 7 system. So even though I couldn't guess, what their numbers would have looked like, when I first went to Israel, and I knew that our numerals were called Arabic numbers, and then when I first went to Israel in Palestinian areas or whatever, and I realized that the Arabs don't use Arabic numbers. They use a variety. They use some variation on that. I was very surprised to see that the font of their numbers looked different. So I couldn't guess what marks ancient biblical Arab people would have made to indicate 10 or 11 or 20 or 31 or 34, but they did have a base 10 system because that's how they describe it. But I think that they think that just the rhythm of the universe is in 7s. Yeah. And I just find that mystically and mythically and poetically quite powerful. That the earth has the week has a Shabbos, the land has a Shabbos, people have a human scale Shabbos, the land has a agriculturally shaped Shabbat, and that's 7 times 7 for 50, and that the 49 and 50 plays into our calendar in another way, of course, which is also the time we're on right now. We're on the 34th day of the Omer as we record this, and I got my haircut.
Haircut yesterday.
Yeah, thank you. And
Barry,
the passage from Pesach to Shavuot is also a 7 cycle. Is also a 7 cycle. So I think that they feel that they're like in rhythm with a time scale that's beyond them. by the way, in Kabbalah, in the Middle Ages, this was a fairly controversial position, and like sort of, if you can say a funny thing like this, normative Kabbalah rejected it. Like, I think Rav Isaac Luria and associated people in Tzfat rejected this, but there was in the Middle Ages a doctrine known as Torah Hashmitot, the sabbatical cycles, and the Talmud says in one place, the world will exist for 6,000 years and then lie fallow for 1,000 years. So the same basic idea of a time scale. It says in Tractate Sanhedrin, a time scale of six in that case 6,000 units of work and 1,000 units of rest. And the Kabbalistic idea of Torah Hashmitot is that there will be like continual Shmitot. There'll be continual fullness and retrenchment for the whole universe. So for them, it's just like that's the pulse, the systole and diastole of existence is 6 and 1, 6 and 1, 6 and 1.
Yeah,
What I would add is that the way that you've described the sabbatical year and the 7-year cycles is that time itself also needs a Shabbos. And what we're left with is this idea that the main concern of the Torah reading this week is time and space, and they're intimately linked.
What do you mean?
So that's a very good question. So what I mean is that, we like to describe the world that we live in 4 dimensions: the 3 dimensions of space, length, width, and height, and the dimension of time. And time is, we understand, is something separate because we mark it differently, and it's very different. We could imagine a 3-dimensional graph to plot space, but no one I know at least, has quite figured out how to graph time and space in one visual apparatus. So we live our life.
Einstein, space-time curvature, something, I don't understand it, but
yeah. Well, so what I want to say is that our sense of time and space often are at odds with each other, and what the Torah is suggesting is that they're actually quite close to each other.
Let me put the word relationship or relational in this, which is both in terms of human beings and their relationship to each other, and on the human divine axis. And so I want to ask this. It's a favorite theme, which is that everything goes through a cycle, everything goes through a season, everything goes through phases. That's Kohelet, the beautiful chapter in Kohelet. There's a season for everything under heaven, and life does go through seasons, as we have no doubt talked about before. And that there is a relationship to the land that obviously goes through its annual seasons based on agriculture, but it goes in its septennial seasons because when you have reached the end of the 6th year, you're going to have this 7th year, and the peculiarity of the 7th year is that A, you're not supposed to plant or reap on the 7th year, and B, the 6th year is going to be such a bumper crop, such a bumper harvest, that the 6th year's harvest is going to last enough for the 7th year and enough to be able to plant and eat for the 8th year, and also to eat on the 9th year, so that you'll be able to reap the planted of the 1st year of the next cycle, the 8th year, already in the 9th year. That sounds a little far-fetched. And the idea being that, God says, "Vitziviti et birchati." I'm going to command my blessing, "Vitziviti et birchati." It's chapter 25, verse 21. Bashana shishit v'asat hatuah lishlosh shanim. You're going to get a trifold crop, like that kind of expansive crop, produce on the 6th year. It sounds a little far-fetched in terms of,
that's a Yiddish expression.
Far-fetched, yes.
It's far-fetched.
That, what if there's this famine in the 6th year? I mean, and of course, we have plenty of proof in the Bible of the existence of famine. And so I want to ask, like, what is this saying really? Is this a poetic statement? Is it a literal statement or a non-literal statement? And my own inclination is, friends, us who live in the non-Orthodox world, I run by the motto, friends don't let friends interpret the Bible literally. That's a good motto for me. Friends don't let friends interpret. And I see in this a kind of aspirational statement that the cycles are imprinted in the universe in such a way that are to keep you relational, your relationship with God intact, and your relationship with each other intact.
This part you're saying right now, to me, is very, 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 very critical here. I do think that the Bible wants us to say that our relationship to God is one of trust, and to say that an orientation to the world is like, this is going to be okay. Rely, be open, be trusting, and even though it doesn't seem promising, have some faith as you walk this sometimes challenging journey. And I totally agree with that vis-a-vis God, vis-a-vis humanity and God, or Israel and God. But the second thing you said, which I also think is really super central here, which is that the septennial cycle of a seventh year in which you do no productive agricultural work is inextricable from the claim of renewed human equality in that seventh year. The owners of the land, they don't cede ownership of land forever, but they don't effectively own it in the seventh year. Everybody has equal access to what grows wild in it. That's a human equality thing. The Jubilee cycle, so that's a return to a kind of primal equality, back to Eden, so to speak. Maybe even more than so to speak, back to Eden in a world which produces food on its own and everybody takes it equally. And then the 49th year into the 50th Jubilee, every family returns to an ancestral holding, gets a second start. And also in our Parasha, which is very, very strong, is mitzvot about how to deal with poverty. And the commandment that if your neighbor has had to sell off their land, you are commanded to buy it back from them. And if you are commanded to loan them money, and you are commanded, if chas v'chalila, they go into debt slavery. Bible has slavery, and didn't they read the story about the freedom from Egypt? What? But in the Bible, slavery is debt slavery. You owe somebody $100, you can't pay. You have to go to work for them. You stole something. You had the court imposed a $100 penalty. You don't pay. You don't have the money. You have to go into debt slavery and work it off. If somebody goes in debt slavery, you have to help them out of it. You have to redeem them. Those are mitzvot that are tied to a cycle in which we expect that we are going to help maintain a baseline of equality throughout the system, and especially every seventh year, we're going to have real social equality. That's going to stabilize our society in a big way.
So again, it's aspirational, because in reality, these things broke down. There was a Shemitah, but I mean, the history of these things, I mean, I only know the kind of like the headlines of this history, which is that, they tried this, there were Shemitot, but in the end, they were not effective. The Jubilee may not have been observed to the extent that it was, because it was impossible. And maybe, as aspirational, which has, in a sense, the Jubilee as the grand reset for the economy, a reset of landholding, a reset of relationships, that's aspirational. I mean, in terms of human to human relationships, I think the statements relating to indentured servitude, lo ta'avod bo avodat aved, you're not allowed to reduce someone to slavery, even when they are an indentured servant to you. You can't give them, Rashi's beautiful comment, avodah shel gnai. You can't give them despicable work or disgraceful work, the kind of work that will demean them. Sheyeni karba ke'eved, that they will be recognized as a slave. And I love the illustration. Shelo yolich kelav acharav levet hamerchaz. The guy can't walk behind you with your clothing to the bathhouse. Velo yin'allo min alav, and he can't function as your shoe, your own personal shoe person.
You can't make your slave tie your shoes.
Exactly, and then you have the line lo tirdeh bo b'farach, which is do not have that demeaning crushing work, the work of Egypt. So there is a bit of sensitivity to the relational aspect here, that people have to realize that they're free and that they're God servants.
So I want to bring us back to this bountiful 6th year for a moment, because if we take the Bible at its word, at the end of the 6th year, you know how your next 3 years are going to be. Because if you don't have that much food, you're going to starve, because there's no other way of getting food in the next few years without planting. And that reminds me that that's also true of the agricultural year in Israel, because the rainy season comes before the planting. So if there's not been enough rain already before you've begun your agricultural year, you already know that you're going to have problems. And as I get older, I become increasingly aware, perhaps, or sympathetic to the role of miracles in the Bible. And this 6th year is a miracle. It is something that God must bestow upon the people, because it's not natural for land to produce 3 years worth of crops in 1 year. And it also is not natural for some of these laws to actually take place. I think one of the reasons why we have this reset that Jeremy spoke about is because if people are left to their natural devices, bad things will happen, because our nature inclines as much to evil as it does to good, if not more so. And we need something to prevent that from happening. And I think part of what the Bible is teaching us is that law, conceived of as divine law, is meant to curb our natural inclinations so that we could truly live a blessed life.
Yeah, but it's so radical. It's such a radical, approach.
We're radical people. Get used to it.
Of course we are, but look, in the end, it doesn't work. We don't constitute our lives on the basis of this cycle anymore. As romantic as I want to be about 7 years and then a human being, human relationships, children, parents, people who are married, they do go in cycles. There are certain cycles. Is it exactly 7 years or not? It functions as a useful frame. Certainly the decade idea functions as a useful, otherwise we wouldn't celebrate 20th anniversaries, 30th anniversaries, 25th anniversaries, 50th anniversaries. These are milestone events for us that may be artificial, right? Maybe we should be more inclined to celebrating septennial anniversaries as opposed to decade anniversaries.
Right, but the week itself is artificial because there's no astronomical correlative with it.
So
the day, the week, the day, the month, and the year are all based on things that you can see, and the week is not. And what I would suggest is that the reason why the Bible organizes time along the sevens is to teach something about that precisely. That there is an element of the unnatural in the way that we live a holy life.
Because it's God's time. That's what my shaking of my head, my rebuttal to you is that, of course, it's artificial, but it's not artificial. It's been imprinted, as far as the Bible is concerned, from day one, literally day one.
Well, no, it's from day 7.
Day 7, which starts with a first.
It does start with day 1. I'll grant you that, but
okay, but there's a first cycle that is imprinted into the whole universe according to our worldview here, right? That it's not us. It's Shabbat Ladonai, right? And so the 7 years.
But it's only Shabbat Ladonai if we observe it, right? Yeah. It's not enough for God. God needs us.
God needs us for that to be the partner in that rhythm, right? Exactly, and that's the Amsegula nature of the Jewish people. That the Jewish people is in sync with the divine rhythm. Okay,
beautiful. But when it is not,
it's not. Yes.
Here's the next part of the Parasha.
Yes, go on.
So we're reading because the holiday cycles will sometimes. I mean, it's not because the holiday cycles will disrupt the Israel and diaspora correspondence Torah readings, but it is a fact that they sometimes do, and so they get back on sync. Are they on sync now? Will they be on sync now again?
I think at Nassau they come together.
Nassau? Shavuot. This right, we're gonna have Shavuot's going to fall on
second day Shavuot, and they're back on the Torah reading. So
on Saturday, right? So we read double parsha this weekend. Behukotai, which happens to be the bat mitzvah portion of my beloved youngest child.
And my daughter as well.
Very short parshiot, which is good. It states that, you know, if you I'll just read it to you, not just describe it. If you follow my commandments and faithfully observe my laws, I will grant you rains in its season, and the earth will yield its produce, and the trees of the field will yield their fruit. Your threshing will overtake the vintage, and your vintage will overtake the sowing, and you'll eat your fill of bread and dwell securely in your land, and I'll grant peace in the land, and you'll lie down untroubled. Ushchatem ve'ein macharid, be literal and say there will be no terrorism.
Yes.
And you'll scare away your enemies, and everything will go great, and you will live in a society of abundance. But if you do not, and if you do not walk in my ways, and if you reject my commandments, I'm going to turn back to you, and I'm going to terrify you and wreak misery on you. And the parsha has a long series of curses. But one of the main themes of that passage is, if you did not live in sync with the septennial cycles, and you did not let the land rest, let the land have her Shabbatot, she's going to have them, but it's because we have chased you away. We have scattered you away because you have disrupted the rhythm, and the rhythm will win out. You know, you can think about, like, when we look at these passages known as the tochecha, the rebuke, the terrifying, you know, God punishing the people. You know, like, you think on theological levels, well, what kind of God image is that? Do I really want to, you know, if friends don't let friends read the Torah literally, then what kind of God is puts all these very graphic punishments and you know, abuse to the people? Well, actually, so in an era of ecological devastation, or which we fear ecological devastation, it actually acquires a lovely resonance, which is, if you don't take care of the land, land's going to be fine, but you're not.
Yeah. There are consequences. I mean, we don't need to be literal here in the sense of seeing this. I think, you know, Jews in the post-Holocaust era are quite traumatized by reading passages like these. And certainly maybe in the pre-Holocaust era, we're traumatized by them, given the fact that, you know, they did experience all sorts of, you know, other pogroms and massacres prior to that. I was reading that we're in the 900th anniversary of one of the sets of massacres in the Crusades, you know. Yeah. And you know, how these events, you know, they had generational consequences for Jews that we may not be appreciative so many years later, but they did affect the course of Jewish history in some ways. But maybe to just say, look, there are consequences for your behavior. There are consequences and there's a conditionality to your life, and there's a conditionality to your residency. It's very difficult for us to apprehend this, especially, you know, given the fact that you know, as far as Israel is concerned, as far as Zionism is concerned, you know, the Zionist project is meant to be it's a permanent project, and it's in tension with these passages in the Bible which say, look, you know, don't be so sure. You know, in fact, Jewish history includes, you know, 2 convulsions where there were exiles, and we lived in the second exile for 2,000 years, and that's based on a biblical understanding of conditionality. It's very, very difficult to really wrap our minds around this. It's no wonder we want to chant this quietly. You know, there's the custom to simply just whispering these things. But you know, the Vilna Gaon said that that's a stupid custom. Vilna Gaon said, do not chant these, you know, quietly. You're supposed to chant them, you know, loud,
like the Torah,
like any other parsha of the Torah.
There's also a custom to call the rabbi of the synagogue up for that aliyah.
For that aliyah, so that the rabbi. So is it the custom to call the rabbi for it's not shishi.
So you shouldn't wish curses on anyone else.
So no, but it's the rabbi gets the aliyah afterwards, or the rabbi gets the aliyah.
Oh, that one, the tochacha, because you don't want any of the badness of the aliyah to spill over onto
yes. Right, we have
the rabbi can take it.
Immunity, curse immunity.
But what I would suggest, in light of my earlier comment, that this parsha is about people needing God. So if Behar is about God needing us, Behukotai is about us needing God. And it's a reminder, because they're joined this year in the diaspora, that it's supposed to be a partnership. And you were talking about not interpreting the Bible literally. I think that one of the difficulties we have is that I think perhaps we're looking for new metaphors and haven't quite found them of what this partnership with God is supposed to be like.
Well, it's up to all of us to try and keep it. If you are the dealer, I'm out of the game. Leonard.
Of course.
Rabbi Eliezer.
If you are the healer, I'm broken and lame. It's amazing, that song, which I'm referring to is You Want It Darker, which we've quoted many times. Those are two metaphors for God. God is dealing, God is healing. And how we relate to those metaphors. And so you look, even reading Behukotai, as modern Jews who are inspired by many, many different things, a person is likely to read these chapters and say, I'm out. This is not what I signed on for. It's very difficult to read it, and very difficult.
Well, you can imagine people, but if you are a theist,
Yes.
and b'chol zot, I am, you can say I'm out, but you still live in God's universe, and that's the amazing thing about that Leonard Cohen song. It's like, he does kind of say I'm out, and he says hineni, right? Here I am.
Hineni. So I'm ready, my Lord. I'm ready. So in a way, there's also acceptance. So I guess, look, being historical conservative Jews, we look at these texts in a context. We put them in historical context and see them not as the end of the discussion, but the beginning of a discussion, and that it's one voice. It's one voice of a theology. There are many, many voices of a theology which has as its core the maintenance of one God, certainly, but this experience of God and conditionality, unconditionality, more in terms of God as merciful and compassionate rather than God as punishing, despite the fact that we experience a history that has often been interpreted as mipnei chataenu, because of our sins we have nitrachaknu mi'al artzeinu, we've been exiled from our land. That very, very difficult to reconcile that.
Yeah, it's deep. I have something else to say that's
Go ahead.
Small. It's not nearly as deep as that, but it's in the category. So I'm thinking about Odelia's bat mitzvah, which was in 2016. It was in May of 2016.
7 years ago, septennial.
Which first of all, septennial cycle, but it was also before the 2016 presidential election, which now seems like I'm saying something like this was before Rutherford B. Hayes got elected. It seems like it was a really long time ago. The bat mitzvah was very close, but this is before Donald Trump. Ooh. But anyway, this is just an observation about many times as read the Torah, there's always something new to discover, and this is like blatantly obvious, and I didn't notice it until Odalia was preparing for bat mitzvah. The last line of chapter 26 of Leviticus is Ele achukim v'mishpatim v'hatorot asher natan Adonai beino lebein bnei Israel v'har Sinai b'yad Moshe. These are the laws, rules, instructions that God established between Moses and Mount Sinai, between himself and the Israelite people. And then the last line of chapter 27 is Ele hamitzvot asher tziva Adonai et Moshe el bnei Israel v'har Sinai. These are the commandments which the Lord gave Moses to the Israelite people on Mount Sinai. The book ends twice. The book of Leviticus ends at the end of chapter 26. And it's, wait, and then there's chapter 27, and then it ends again. It's as we conservative Jews, we non-Orthodox Jews like to notice the ways in which the Torah is, it didn't spring out at one time. It's edited. It's got different things that seem compatible or sometimes seem incompatible. And when I first noticed things, like, my goodness, chapter 27 is an appendix to an otherwise ending book of Leviticus. That was the craziest thing.
Yes, but it also ends with the word chazak, which is not a biblical word, but it's our word, right? The coda is these were the laws at Mount Sinai, and then the reprise, These were the laws of Mount Sinai. This is ending the book. It's an end. It's another phase of our lives as we journey through the Torah together. And it's a phase that our viewers and listeners have been so loyal to us and so kind and generous with their comments. We thank you for them. We thank you for coming along this journey. So with that, we're going to conclude the book of Vayikra. Let's just make a shout out to all the viewers and listeners. Chazak, chazak.
Chazak.
Be strong and Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you next week.
Shabbat Shalom.
Next edition of Talk.